Hello all, in this video we will talk about final keyword in Java. So in the previous videos we already spoke about static methods, static variables and static block. Okay. Just to summarize, we discussed that inside the static method you can't use non-static method and variables, but vice versa can happen. Because in the non-static methods you can use static methods and static variables, because static methods and static variables are shared across all objects. Okay, you can use that. Now coming to the final keyword in Java, you can add final keyword in three scenarios. One is you can add final keyword to the variables, and you can add final keyword to the methods, and you can add final keywords to the class. Okay, so these are the three places where you can add the final keyword in Java. So first we will talk about the final variables. So we are using final keyword, right? Like as the name says, it's final. You can't change it. You can't change a final variable, you can't change the final method, and you can't even change the final class. How that is happening, we will discuss it in detail. So coming to the final variables, once the variable is initialized, you can't change the variable value, because sometimes, let's say a player has name. Okay, usually if you compare even with the real world scenario, a person has a single name and that particular person's name can't change, right? From time to time, whatever the name they have in the beginning, that remains constant throughout their lifetime. So in the same way, player also has the name. Once the name is initialized, that can't be changed. But if you don't declare it as, let's say I don't declare this as a final. Okay, now in the constructor I assigned a test, and if in any of the methods, or even if it is a public variable, even from outside this class, I can change the name variable. Okay, name value. Here initially I assigned some test. Okay, test something like that. Now in the get count of method I can change it, but there can be scenarios where you don't want the variable names to get variable values to be changed. Whatever the value that you did for the first time, that has to be remained. Okay, that's where you like to prevent this. Now here you can change the name value multiple times. I can change in this method, even I can write another method and I can change there as well, to prevent that happening. Okay, to prevent a variable value get changed every time, you can add a final keyword in front of the variable in front of the variable data type. Now here if I add a final keyword here, then Java throws error. Like if you try to assign values in any of the methods or even from outside of this class, then Java will throw error that this is a final variable and you can't change it. Now if you look, let's look at the error. Okay, cannot assign a value to the final variable. So Java puts that restriction. The only thing you have to do when you come across a scenario where you don't want your variable values to be changed, just add final keyword, then Java takes care of it. Okay, now once this variable is initialized, you can't change it, right? So there are two places you can assign values to this player class, to this variable name. One is during the declaration itself, you can assign a name. Like let's say my name is Java. Okay, during the declaration itself, here I am declaring the variable instance variable string name. Okay, string name equal to Java. During the declaration itself, you can assign it. Or if you want to assign, like let's say this is a constant name, right? So this Java will remain same for all objects. For all object variables you have the name. But if you want this name to be passed as a parameter from the constructor itself, right? Let's say you don't want to put a constant value for all objects. If you do like this during the declaration itself, this name would be constant for all objects. Okay, like let's say you don't want it and you want the name values different for different objects, and you want that name values that control you want to give it to the person who is creating the object. Let's say a person who is creating the object can assign the name. Okay, so in this case, if you say this dot name, and you can pass name. Okay, so this will work fine. So during the declaration itself, if you do it, then that value would be constant for all objects. Okay, how many ever objects you create for the player, that value, that name would be Java. But if you want to give control to the person, whoever is creating the object, then you can put something like this parameterized constructor and you can assign that name. So even here you have declared it and you are initializing it only once. Okay, this will work fine. But if you try to change again like this dot name, then Java will throw error. Okay, so final variables can be initialized only at two places. One is during the declaration and one more is in the constructor. So even in the constructor, let's say even if it is not parameterized, you can put some constant value as well. It will still work fine. Okay, it depends on your use case, whether it should be constant across all objects or whether it should vary from one object to another object. It depends on you. But there are only two places to declare it, to initialize it. One is during the declaration, one is during the in the constructor itself. Let's say I declared my variable as final, but I did not initialize it. Okay, I did not initialize it. Then Java will throw error because there are only two places to initialize a final variable. Like one is during the declaration and one is in the constructor, and you are not doing it. So there is no other place for this variable to get initialized. That's why I'm throwing you error. So Java says that final variables, if you don't initialize it, it will throw error. Okay. Now this is for the normal variable, right? This is a normal instance variable. You can add final to the static variables as well, okay? But for the static variables, whenever you are adding static final to the static variables, it should be public. And then private. And then it has to be like either it should be initialized during the declaration itself or it should be initialized in the static block. Okay, this will work fine now. Okay, now if you look here, we all know, right, the static variables should be initialized even before an object gets created, or it should get initialized even before object gets created and even before static method gets invoked. Okay, and that happens when you declare a value when you initialize a value during declaration itself. Or one more thing is you have to do that in the static block. Okay, if you put this like you can compare this with the non-static variable initialization. In the non-static variable, you did it in the constructor. If you don't initialize value during declaration, you did it in the constructor. But here static variables should have been initialized even before objects exist, right? Even before object gets created. So if you put logic here, then it works only during like if you put some logic here, then during the object creation this will get initialized. Okay, but before that, if someone calls some static method like this, okay, public static string count, and if someone calls like this name, okay, then if someone calls some static method which is returning the static value, which is returning the static variable value, then you will get an error. Okay, so that's why for a static variable, if you are making it as a final, either do like this, okay, something like that. You either do this, or if you did not initialize it during the declaration, then put it in the static block. Okay, now here you can't do it at the two places. You declared it, you initialized it, and then you are doing it in the static block. It will throw error. Okay, cannot assign because it's a variable. And let's say you don't do it at both places, then also it will throw error. Okay, then also it will throw error that it's not initialized. Final variable might not have been initialized. So to summarize the final variable concept, if you don't want your value to be changed once it is initialized, then declare that value as is final. And there are only two places to initialize a final variable value. One is during the declaration and one is in the constructor if it is a non-static variable, and another is in the static block if it is a static variable. Okay. Now there are constants, right? Let's say you want to usually you know, right, pi value. It would be 3 point something, and there can be another constants like that as well. Like I'm just saying, you have this math.pi. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's say I want to print math.pi. Pi value always remains same because it was 3.14, always remains same. How many ever objects? This is a variable. Okay, return, let me remove this. And if you look at this final static, yeah. So if you look at this pi value, it would be 3.14 and it's constant. It's constant, and there can be another constants like this. Let's say you want some, like in your class you want to put some constant value, and that constant value you want to declare some constant value like pi. Then in that case what you can do is you can mark this as a public static final, and then you can put something like that pi. Okay, let's say I want to declare some variable 3.141 static integer double. Okay, now so yeah, let me remove this. Now public stat, if you add public static final, if you add static and final to any variable, then it means that it is a constant. Okay, public static final, let's say you don't do here, and then what I can do is I can do it here as well, pi 3.14141. Correct. So if you want any constant, okay, if you want to declare a constant is nothing but that value is same, right? That value is same across all objects. So that means that you are making that variable as a static, because static variable is shared across all objects. Okay, and you don't want, since that is a constant value, you don't want others to change that value. Then what you will do, you will do as a final for that. Okay, you will make that as final. So whenever you have something like this static and final, then you call that as a constant. And to anyway, static and final, public static final are called constants. And to form the naming conventions for the constant, you should use the capital letters. Okay, like pi. And if you have multiple words like pi value something, you just separate it with underscore and use the underscore and use the capital letters for all the letters that are present here. So this is the standard naming convention that you follow for the constants. Okay, so if a variable is public static final, then that is a constant value. You basically, to declare the constant values, you use that, because it's shared across all, the value is same across all instances and you can't change it. That's why you call, like, that's why you mention that as a constant here. So if you see public static final, what I have done 25. So I can do it inside the static block as well if I don't declare it directly here itself. So maybe x value 35, I can put like this as well, because there are two places for any variable to go, for any final variable to get initialized, right? One is during declaration and one is either in the constructor or in the static block, depends on what kind of variable it is. Okay, so we are done with the final variables where the value will not change once it is initialized, and initialization happens either during declaration or during the constructor or in the static block, depends on what kind of variable it is. Now we will talk about final methods. Okay, what is mean by a final method? If you say a method is a final, you can't override the method, which means that if, let's say, you have a parent class, and what I'll do is I'll put some duck itself. Okay, as I'll take duck as an example, and now I will do public void quack. Okay, so let's say a particular duck is quacking and the behavior is, and let's say you have multiple kinds of ducks. There are subcategories inside the ducks as well, right? But the behavior and the way how they make sound is same for all ducks. Now in this case, let's say you have something like mallard duck. Okay, mallard duck, which extends duck. Okay, now what happens is, now in this case I can override the behavior. Okay, public void quack of, I can override it. So this is an override behavior. Okay, because inside the duck, what I have done, public void quack of, what I can do is I can override the behavior here. It overrides quack in class doc. I can override the behavior, but what I want is this behavior is same for all my subclasses. Okay, mallard duck also makes a sound similarly, and even if there are any other subcategories inside the duck, all make sound similarly. That's why I had put that particular behavior here in my parent class, and all classes all classes can use this behavior, okay? Like I can create instance for Muller duck. Let's see here. What I can do is duck, I can do new Muller duck, and then I can do duck.quack off. This way all subcategories of the ducks can use this quack behavior. But what I see is these guys, Muller duck or the subcategories, they are adding their own implementation for making sound. But that's not correct. They shouldn't do it, because all ducks make sound similarly and you should not change the way they make the sound. And I have already provided that implementation here. I don't want these subclasses to override this quack sound and add their own implementation. I have a requirement like that. In that case, now you can safely override the behavior and it's working fine. But to avoid that, what you can do is you can make this as a final, okay? If you make this method as final, then your subclasses can't override the behavior. It will throw error. If you see, quack can't override quack in duck. Overridden method is final, okay? So if you mark any of the methods as final, then it means that your subclasses can't override the method and provide their own implementation. There can be so many use cases related to this, where you don't want your subclasses to override your methods and provide their own implementation. So in these cases, you can add final keyword to methods, okay? And coming to the final class, okay? So now let's say you have a duck class and you have, let's say you have your final class duck and you don't want subclasses for this class duck, okay? You don't want someone come, okay? You don't want someone come and create a subclass for duck and add their own implementations. Like let's say if I don't mark this as a final, okay, I have created Muller duck, okay? Now these methods get size, set size, get duck count of, people can override the behavior and people can use these values as well, okay? Like they can use these methods directly. They can override the behavior. They can override the behavior because they can override these methods in the Muller duck, and they can use these methods as well, okay? Because Muller duck is extending the duck, they can use this. But if you don't want that to happen, if you don't want your subclasses extend your class, then you can mark this class as a final, okay? If you mark your class as a final, then you can't create subclasses for this. So there can be so many use cases for that, okay? Where your subclasses are using the methods, or where your subclasses are using the implementations, okay? Or they are overriding it. Let's say you have these methods, okay? One method you have marked it as a final, so you can't override inside this subclass, okay? But let's say you want these methods also final. You don't want any of your subclass to invoke this kind, like you don't want your Muller duck to override the behaviors for all these methods, then you have to add final to each and every method, okay? Instead of doing that, you can add a single final here and remove it. Because if you remove it, what happens? If you remove it here and add it at the class, then you can't even create subclasses for duck, and you can't override the behavior. Then that is one of the use case. So when you say when you add final to a class, then it means that you can't subclass, and that will indirectly says that you can't override the behaviors that are present inside the duck, okay? So this is one of the use case, okay? And sometimes you don't want to create subclasses for your class, then in that case also you can mark this as a final. So when a class is marked final, all the methods that are present inside the class are final methods, okay? But if you don't mark this as a final, then you can have a final, like a normal class can have final methods and normal methods. But if it is a final class, it means that all methods inside the final class are the final methods, okay? So now we have we discussed about three things: final variables, final methods, and final class. Final variables are the ones for which you can't change the values except initializing it, and initialization happens during the declaration, and then during the declaration and then in the constructor. If it is a normal variable, non-static, then you can initialize the value in the constructor. If it is a static value, you can initialize the value in the static block. Okay. Now if you don't initialize, if you make a value variable as a final, and if you don't initialize it either in the constructor or static block or during the declaration, then Java will give you the error. Okay. Now coming to the final method, if you don't want your method to be overridden by the subclasses, then you can mark your method as a final so that no one else will override the implementation that was given by you. And if you don't want your class to be subclassed, if you don't want someone creating child classes for your class, then you can mark this as a final. So final class means all the methods inside the class are final. A normal class can have both final and non-final methods, but a final class will always have all the methods which are final. Okay. Yeah. That's it about the final keyword in Java. Thank you.